huge amounts of population into the country. Of course, everyone that comes in has to do what?
Live somewhere.
They have to live somewhere. And that's also what we're going to talk about in podcasts is government's role.
It's not one each.
No. We're not going to have it. This is a professional podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Kapches. I'm president of Chestnut Park Real Estate. Today, we're going to be doing our first podcast. Doug and I, who will introduce himself in a moment. My background, I've been with Chestnut Park basically since the beginning, you might say, going back to 1990. And Chestnut Park is a brokerage that primarily works the luxury market in Toronto and in Southern Ontario. The reason for the podcast, though, is not to tell you about Chestnut Park, but Doug and I felt that it was important that we have some insights into what's happening in the real estate market, both in Toronto and in Southern Ontario, where Chestnut Park has its various offices. And we'll get into a little bit more of that as we move our way through the podcast. Mm-hmm. But I'd like Doug to introduce himself so that you know who the other side of this podcast is all about. Doug.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Doug Gubitz, and I've been selling real estate, or I sold real estate for 37 years, I believe, and I joined Chestnut Park almost 30 years ago. So Chris and I struck up a friendship pretty well right away in 1995. We've
had our moments.
Yeah, we have. But generally speaking, we've had our disagreements.
Yeah, disagreements, yes.
So after about 30 years of sales, or 28 years of sales, Chris and I had discussions about me joining Chestnut Park's management team. And almost exactly 2 years to today, Chris invited me to join as vice president of business development. And Chris and I worked together managing the operations of Chestnut Park. And that's been now 2 years. So that's my history. I also have a law degree, so that probably helped Chris along a little bit. And
I have a law degree too.
You have a law degree too. so that probably, to a great extent, that's probably why we see so many things eye to eye, right? Because we bring a different perspective to things. Right. So essentially, that's my background and Chris's, and here we are today.
So we as I said a moment ago, we want to talk about real estate. And we've given considerable thought as to how to go about it. Real estate can at times be a kind of a dry subject. Other times it could be quite emotional. But we thought we would also provide a different perspective and one might say a little bit of levity to our conversations related to real estate. And you may have noticed there are a couple of bottles of wine on the table. I might add the wonderful bottles of Bordeaux. And they, to some extent, are giving us the basis for what this podcast is going to be called. We had a number of different titles, names for it. What was one of them, Doug?
Real Estate Unlocked.
Unlocked,
was
Real
the first
Estate Unlocked. But that sounded kind of dull, and as time went on, Doug came up with the idea of calling it Decanting Real Estate.
Real Estate Decanted.
Real Estate Decanted. And right. Hence, we thought we would also, during the course of the podcast, decant a wonderful bottle of Bordeaux. And Doug perhaps could tell us a little bit about the wines that are on the table.
Chris has been to many of wine dinners at my house over the decades. My family has an interest in Bordeaux. We always have. So Chris has been party to quite a few good bottles, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Many.
Most are food-oriented wines. Well, all of Bordeaux wines are food-oriented, so it's a little tricky to do this without food. But I always bring two wines when I'm with Chris, so I let him decide. I give him a little bit of background. He's a very, very good wine taster. So in this case, I brought two from a region in Bordeaux that I've never actually served to before, called Saint-Estèphe, at the top of Bordeaux, a classified growth, Coste Laborie. And the second wine of another classified growth, Chateau Montrose, but you are very sensitive to tannins, my young friend. So my thinking, since these are relatively young wines, 2016, you might prefer the second wine, which is meant to drink a little younger.
Based on your description, I would prefer the second wine, Doug.
But you'd prefer this with food.
With food.
Yes.
With food.
So in due course, we're going to open that.
All right. Okay. So what are we going to talk about our first podcast? It was my view that we have to put the market, where we find ourselves, the industry, into some perspective. And I thought the best way to do that is to do a summation of how and what has happened since 2020.
I thought you said 2019.
I'm going to start 2020, but we could start at 2019. Okay. I mean, 2019, the real estate market was moving along, I think, in a brilliant fashion. Average sale prices were going up. In fact, at the very beginning of 2020, we, for the first time in the GTA, had an average sale price of over $1 million, which I thought was startling at the time. And that was at the very beginning in January or in February of 2020. And then, of course, we hit March of 2020. And probably everyone that is watching this podcast, and we hope some people are.
Yep. Well, that's the idea.
We hope some people are. The market and the world was impacted by the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, what was that date?
I believe it was March the 13th when the lockdown first started. Right. Mm-hmm. If not, it was in and around that date. And all of a sudden, everything changed. In fact, there was no real estate market for the better part of 2 or 3 months. One might say, well, why only 2 or 3 months? Well, it was kind of shocking to us at the time as well, because we thought, and I think you will remember this, Doug, that the world was actually coming to an end. And our concerns weren't focused on real estate. They were really focused on, and I don't want to sound too dramatic, but just on survival at that time and making sure we got through that period. But then as we went on, all of a sudden, by May and June of 2020, the market started literally accelerating in a way that we had never seen before. All of a sudden, and you can comment on this, Doug, having a safe place became paramount in people's lives, and homes where they live, the bricks and mortar, became that as we'd never seen it before. And not only in Toronto, but outside of Toronto, where the market literally exploded as people who were living, unfortunately, in very small condominium apartments, density, the
fear of getting sick.
Yes. If they could, started leaving the city in droves. And it was during that period that the whole concept of working at home, working virtually, was developed as well, which accelerated this process.
Yeah, the concept was called sanctuary housing.
Correct. So as we continued to move through 2020 and then into 2021, the real estate market became kind of the driving force in the economy during that period.
Notwithstanding, we couldn't show houses, if you remember.
And that's the interesting thing. Maybe you should comment about the routines that we had to go through.
I was an agent at the time, and it was, well, first of all, you developed a brilliant protocol where we were having sellers release us from any liability for catching COVID because we were showing their houses, you recall. It was very difficult. One at a time only. Everybody had to be masked. You had to sanitize your hands at the entranceway. It was very complicated, and there were many people
cleaning countertops.
You couldn't use the bathrooms.
Cabinets.
Couldn't touch taps. There were agents who wouldn't even go into the house, which was essentially a violation of RICO. You had to be in the house with the client. You can't let them through the house without you. But people were doing that. Other agents were absolutely avoiding showings at all. And houses were being sold virtually, if you remember. You don't even go in. Condo boards were not letting showings in some cases. was a very tricky time. You would have anticipated, given those restrictions, that the market would be absolutely stalled.
The opposite.
The absolute opposite. And before we go any deeper into this COVID market analysis, we should talk about the CMHC projections at the time. If you recall, I don't
recall them very well.
I'm sure, given the fact that you worked there.
That was another lifetime.
Another lifetime. But my recollection is they said the market would drop 20% in the first year of COVID. Is that right?
I think closer to 30%.
30%. And it was, in fact, the exact opposite.
Correct.
And we have all relied very significantly, I would say, on CMHC predictions over the decades, which have generally been very, very good. Don't you think?
They were, but they were based on patterns that.
But they were reliable, though.
That were reliable, but the COVID market and what happened through that period was extraordinarily unique.
Yeah, but they got it completely fundamentally wrong.
They got it totally wrong.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, continue.
No, that was. But now back to this. The COVID marketplace, April, May, now we're talking about 2020.
Yeah, and then we make our way through the remainder of 2020. And by 2021, the market is like on fire as we've never experienced it before. And at the same time, we have the Bank of Canada trying to ensure that the economy doesn't completely collapse. They lower the bank rate to practically zero. It got down to 0.25%.
Yeah.
For those that may not be aware of it, until recently the bank rate was at 5%. It's now down to 4.25% as we do this conversation. But it got down to 0.25%, which made money exceptionally cheap.
Yeah, the mortgage rates were under 2%.
Under
right?
2%. So that is also, in addition to the psychological factors that we mentioned a few moments ago, further stimulated the market and had even more people in it that had previously not even contemplated buying property. So by 2022, the market was so on fire that opposite forces started to come into play. For just to mention what had happened by the beginning of 2022, in February and March, we hit the peak of the market.
February 2022 was highest, right?
The highest, 1,322,000 was the average sale price for the GTA.
And it started in let's say March 2020 at
We were just
about $1 million.
About $1 million. Right. So we average sale price had gone up by over $300,000 in a period of about less than 2 years.
30%.
It was an incredible increase. But by that time, everyone was were scrutinizing what was happening in this market. It was getting so out of control that changes had to take place, at least from the perspective of the Bank of Canada. And the next thing you knew, the Bank of Canada started increasing its rates. And the moment the Bank of Canada started increasing its rates, the market started to slow. And in addition to the market starting to slow, we saw average sale prices working their way downward again over the period of the next 2 years to the point where we find ourselves today. And now we find ourselves in a market that is exceptionally slow. One of the slowest markets that we've seen in the longest period of time. Just to put some of those comments into perspective, throughout the decade leading up to 2020, we were averaging about 90,000 resales in the GTA. Last year, 2023, there were 65,000 sales.
So just let's clarify, that's all housing types. So,
all housing types.
So it's free.
But not new construction.
Right, so detached, semi-detached, row houses, and condominium apartments and townhouses.
Yeah. This year, we're going to probably be in the same range, ballpark.
Maybe a little more.
Maybe a little bit less.
That's not what we said last meeting.
No, maybe a little bit less than 65,000.
I thought you expected it was going to get up to 66 or 67. Change your mind?
I'm reassessing.
You're reassessing.
I'm reassessing. It is improving. It is improving. It is improving. But I wanted to add another factor to what we're talking about, because in some of our future podcasts, this factor is going to play a huge role in terms of analyzing, decanting the marketplace, is population growth. We cannot forget what's happened in terms of population growth. Over the period of the pandemic, population literally skyrocketed, and primarily in places like Southern Ontario. Federal government effectively opened the floodgates for obvious reasons. We needed more population. Our population was aging, our birth rates were dropping, so huge amounts of population into the country. Of course, everyone that comes in has to do what?
Live somewhere.
They have to live somewhere. And during that same period, we were building, but nowhere near. And in fact, one of our podcasts is going to deal with the issue of what's happened on the new construction side, because it has changed so dramatically, particularly in the last little while. In conjunction with the population, they almost seem to be two forces that are clashing against each other. But in any event, population has to be remembered, because while all of this stuff that we're talking about through the pandemic was happening, prices going up, interest rates, and the role of the Bank of Canada, waves of population were coming in to the extent that in 1 year we had a population growth increase of 1 million people. Puts a lot of pressure on the housing sector, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I think we'd probably want to dedicate an entire podcast.
One question.
No question. To the dynamics of the construction industry in Toronto, which you and I talk about all the time. It's a very frustrating discussion.
It is.
And it's a collision of so many circumstances that it's almost difficult to decant, because you cannot point to one thing that is the cause of our housing crisis in Toronto. It would be great if we could.
Multiple factors.
It's so many of them, and that's why it confounds governments.
Correct.
And analysts, yourself included as an analyst of this. You spend a lot of time thinking about this.
And that's also what we're going to talk about in podcasts is government's role, because unfortunately government has made many intrusions into the marketplace, and my view is that they've done so for political reasons as opposed to good policy reasons.
Well, also they've been reactionary.
Extremely so.
But we, although you and I have been on the same mindset about the impact of government intervention in our city, particularly, and Southern Ontario, arguably.
Right across the country, actually.
Yeah, and right across the Western Hemisphere, if you want to really...
Yeah, and that will be another subject that we'll be talking about, is why house prices have stayed as high as they are. And I'm just going to get to that when I conclude this sort of overview of the market. Why they have stayed so high in... Everywhere. For all intents and purposes. Yeah. And we could itemize certain parts of the world where there are good examples of why that's happened. And Toronto, where we're obviously mostly concerned with, is also an example of that. Because yes, we reached 1,322,000 in February and March of 2022. Prices have come down, but as we speak today, I had a look at the average sale price for the 416 based on sales, and we're over 1.1.
And it's rising every week a little bit.
And every week, now that the rates have come down over the last few months to 4.25%, and we're anticipating, and obviously our podcast will talk about this as we go forward, a further rate cuts that hopefully by the end of 2024 will take us down to a level of about 3.75%, which again will act as a stimulus to the market. So that's where we find ourselves. If we were to generalize, the market literally went down for about 2 or 3 months and then had this upward trajectory for almost 2 years, and then has been working its way down to what I would call a more normal market over the last 18 months.
Just review again. I think it'll summarize nicely. The number of sales in 20. Well, I think you said 19.
Well, the peak number of sales that was in 2021.
before that,
121,000.
I know, but so before that, we were averaging in the range of 90,000. We go into COVID and peak out at
21,000
sales. So think about that. That's adding.
We're half now that peak.
Yeah, we added 30,000 sales. This is GTA.
Correct.
In 1 year. Think about that. Divide 30,000 by 12. 2,500 more sales per month. Roughly 500 trades per week.
Per week.
More.
It was an incredible period.
And we weren't in our offices.
Right.
We were doing all of this from home. You were barely showing properties, and all these offers and bidding wars were all being dealt with electronically.
Correct.
Didn't stop the marketplace in any respect as people were rushing out of the city to move to sanctuary housing. And then we swing all the way back to before 2019 units, down to 65,000. That is a tremendous upheaval.
Yeah.
Both from a good point, 90,000 sales makes a very, very good market.
It was a good market. But remember what I said moments ago. Notwithstanding that we were doing notwithstanding that we were doing those 90,000 sales, population was growing. So technically we should be doing even more.
Right. But we didn't have that. We didn't have enough supply to deliver that.
Correct.
That's a whole other discussion.
So that's where we find ourselves today. But I was wondering, what about that decanting?
Oh, yes, sorry. It's okay, you want to do that? You want this?
What about
and
that
plus, there's also a
decanting?
possibility that this is corked, so there's always a backup. You know that about me. There's always a backup bottle.
I appreciate you bringing the backup bottle.
Yeah. We're not going to have it. It's not one each.
No. We're not going to have it. This is a professional podcast. Right?
Oh, absolutely. I feel quite professional.
But that's where we find ourselves, and we thought that it was important that we begin this by providing that information on the broader scale.
Sorry about the noise.
It's okay. It's a wonderful sound, actually.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a wonderful sound.
Sounds like it's corked.
You can tell just by the sound.
By the sound. Yeah, of course.
No
I'm
way.
an expert.
No way.
No.
You can't.
I can't. You just went right for that. It's fine.
Everyone's
don't
waiting
be
in
anxious.
anticipation.
Well, you can smell. You tell me. I think that smells very good.
It's actually brilliant.
Oh, you can smell the tannins from here?
Yes, it's actually
I hope this
brilliant.
doesn't hurt your sensitive little
It's actually
tannic
brilliant.
tummy.
Maybe you could pour a little so people could see the color. And
Yes, we're doing that. One thing at a time. Jesus. Okay. I brought these gloves. I got it, never mind. Oh, maybe I should do it from this angle so you can get a better look at that.
Maybe you could describe that
Color? It's
the
red.
color.
Yeah, purpley red.
It's got a jammy look.
Jammy. All right, there it is. Second wine of Chateau Montrose from Saint Estèphe. There you go, brother.
I think I'll just nose this.
I think you should. These are little mini decanters. Oh, okay, that's very nice.
Oh my God. I only wish anyone that's watching this had the ability to smell as well as to see and to hear.
Very nice smell.
Because you're missing something spectacular.
Yeah, very, very nice. I'm not great at describing these things, but I'm going to suggest there's a bit of black currant in there.
There's definitely blackcurrant there.
There you go. Maybe some cassis.
Get a little chocolate too.
Cassis. Remember that?
Yes.
Creme de cassis was in everybody's basement when I was growing up, behind the bar. Creme de cassis.
Incredible. So that's our first podcast.
Is that it?
That's our first podcast.
We're done?
We're done.
Okay.
But we have incredible number of subjects and themes that we'll be discussing. And every podcast, Doug will be...
Is that right?
decanting another bottle of wine, giving you a description
We'll discuss that
of it.
at a later date.
Maybe not.
Yeah, no, we will.
Maybe not.
And we have to morph into other wines as well. Maybe Italian, or maybe some of your favorite like low tannin Chardonnays from the county.
Yeah, yes. Actually, that's a very good idea.
Of course,
We will taste some Chardonnays from the county.
Chris prefers white wine generally. I think you appreciate red wine a lot when it's served to you, but you don't go out of your way to get red wine.
Much prefer the Chardonnays, Chablis.
Right. Why is that again? Oh, it's a tannin.
It's a tannins.
But you drink tea in the office, which I remind you is extraordinarily high in tannin.
Okay, I think we're boring people now.
Are we done?
Bye, everybody.